Welcome everyone to our webinar, Discovering Piano Safari in SuperScore. My name is George Litterst. I'm speaking to you from a little town of Rehoboth, Massachusetts on the East Coast. And it's with great delight that I'm here with two wonderful colleagues who are the authors of the Piano Safari method and other musical materials. We do live in a global age where really the world is constitutes our neighborhood. I don't know how we appear on the screen to you, but to my left, the way I'm viewing it, is my neighbor from one state over, Dr. Julie Nur. Julie, welcome and glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And somewhat more distant, maybe 600 or 700 or 800 miles away, Dr. Catherine Fisher from Ohio. Glad to have you here.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us.
So I'd like to start just by doing a little introduction about TimeWarp Technologies, the publisher of SuperScore, and then turn things over to the ladies for a little introduction about Piano Safari, and then we'll get into the heart of our presentation today. TimeWarp Technologies is a music software company. You can find us on the web at timewarptech.com. And we are the producers of several apps, some of which you may be users of, or at least have heard the names for. Classroom Maestro is an app for Mac and PC that enables you to put up a musical staff onto the screen and an on-screen keyboard, and in a very facile, impromptu way, you can easily illustrate single notes, scales, chords, intervals, chord progressions, keyboard hand positions. It's often used in private lessons, online classes through screen sharing, and in college piano classes. Internet Midi is an application for Mac and PC that enables you to connect two MIDI-capable instruments together over the internet, such that when you play a note on your MIDI instrument, you're actually playing the same note on the remote instrument, and vice versa. It's almost like taking two locations and bringing them into one. Home Concert Extreme is an app for Mac, PC, and for iPad. It's an interactive MIDI file player. You can load in pedagogical MIDI files, for example, or even a piano concerto MIDI file, select your part, play, and it will interact with you. It will follow your tempo, respond to your dynamics, and do many musical things of that nature. The app that we're going to be talking about today, of course, is SuperScore, and SuperScore is an app for acquiring and interacting with music, sheet music, in digital form on the iPad. I'm going to just give you a brief look at the TimeWarp Technologies website, where you can find information about all of our applications. It's at timewarptech.com. I would encourage you to sign up for our newsletter and get information from us as it comes out periodically. I'd also call your attention to the fact that on our website, if you were to go to the products menu item and go down to publishers, you'll bring up the publisher page for SuperScore. And if we were to scroll down to Piano Safari and click on the logo, you'll get to a page that showcases all of the Piano Safari publications that are available in SuperScore. Now, you cannot purchase these publications in the SuperScore format from the TimeWarp Technologies website, but you can get information about them. You can see a sample of what the music looks like, see the table of contents, and in many cases even see and listen to a video of the music to see what it's all about. But ultimately the materials are available in SuperScore on the iPad, and we're going to be showing you today how you would acquire them there. So with that as a little introduction to TimeWarp Technologies, ladies, would you like to tell us about Piano Safari?
Sure. Catherine and I are co-authors of the piano method, Piano Safari, and we met in grad school and both always wanted to write a piano method. So as George said, I live in Connecticut and I'm in my studio right now where I teach a small number of students. And Catherine, did you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So my husband, Christopher, and our two children, we live in Athens, Ohio, and that is where Ohio University is located. So my husband teaches there full time, and many of you may be familiar with some of his books and some of his compositions. I do teach there somewhat, but my main job is creating new Piano Safari materials and just running all things with the business regarding Piano Safari along with Julie.
And we've had a busy week this week getting ready for this webinar and conferences and writing more materials. And also this was my first week of teaching. So all my students came back and we were choosing new music and it was really a lot of fun. It's nice to have the kids back for the new school year. So I know many of you might be familiar with Piano Safari, but in case there's anyone that is not, I just wanted to give a very short glimpse of what Piano Safari is. Sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. There we go. So this is the core Piano Safari method for beginners ages 6 through 10. It has 3 levels. And the most unique feature of Piano Safari is that we combine teaching some pieces by rote based on keyboard patterns, and then also at the same time teaching students how to read notation through an intervallic approach. We also have a method which is new for preschool students ages 4 through 6, and each unit focuses on one letter of the music alphabet. And we have many teaching aids, as you'll see on the right here of the screen, some music alphabet cards, animal rhythm patterns, and a piano decorating kit where students can learn the letter names on the keyboard and the groups of 2 and 3 black keys. And so this is a really fun way to introduce students at the young age to the piano, and most of it is taught by rote because we feel that's most age appropriate. And this really sets a good foundation for students then to graduate into our level 1 of the core method. And then our other method series is Piano Safari for the older student, which is designed for ages 10 through adult, beginners ages 10 through adult, and there are 3 levels of that also. It follows the same pedagogical philosophies as the younger children's methods with the combination of rote and reading at the beginning, but it moves at a faster pace and has more sophisticated themes. So all of these materials are on SuperScore, and we're going to show you samples today from all of them. But now I'll turn it back over to George just to give you an overview of how SuperScore works.
Thank you. And thank you also, now that we've done our introductions, to those of you who've introduced yourselves in the chat area. It's really helpful to us to get an idea as to who's here and where you're from. And I can see that we have visitors not only from the United States, but from Canada and from England. And we appreciate that. So please feel free to tell us who you are and where you're from. And as we go along, we'd like to make this session as interactive as we can, and I'd encourage you to put any questions that come to mind into the Q&A window. At the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a Q&A button. That's a different place to make comments or ask questions, really. And for questions that really need to get answered in the course of this hour, it's management issue for us to make sure we don't miss anything. And so if you were to put your questions into the Q&A, that would be most helpful. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is to share my iPad screen. And at this point, you should be seeing the home screen on my iPad. So if you are not yet a SuperScore user, have not acquired it, I'd like to just quickly show you how you would find it. You would tap on the App Store app and go to Apple's App Store. In the lower right corner, you can click on the search button or tap on it. I'm trying to do that and it's not. Oh, I'm already on that search screen. No wonder it's not changing. And then up at the very top where you can type, you would start to type in SuperScore as one word. Now, if other apps come up for, I don't know, testing apps or something that use the word SuperScore, there could be a list of things. If necessary, type the word music after SuperScore, but usually SuperScore is enough. You'll have found it. Apple has this remarkable way when you search for something explicitly that the very first thing Apple shows you is the thing that you did not search for because somebody has paid an ad. So you can get that if you wish, but over on the right is SuperScore, and at this place you would be able to access some video information, see some screens, read descriptions, and so forth. But there's a download button there for acquiring it, and it is a free download, and it comes with sample scores to get you started. Now, for those of you who might be using SuperScore for the first time, I do want to show you the screens that you look at for the very first time, because it's a one-time situation that you have to navigate a little bit. I can't make it look like the exact thing that you will see. I'm going to simulate it because I've already gone through those screens on my iPad. But basically, when you start up SuperScore for the first time, you get to the documentation. You see an overview that's explaining what the buttons do and so forth on the screen. And there will be a message in the middle of the screen that says, you've got two things you can do right now. You can explore the documentation, or you can open up a sample score. And following this webinar, you might be running SuperScore for the first time and be thinking, but I want to go to the store and buy these Piano Safari materials. You can't do that until you've opened up your first score. You've got to get that far. But the documentation screen is something you can always come back to, and every feature of the program is documented. Once you navigate through that, you will be in the library of SuperScore, and you will see a screen like this. There are a bunch of sample folders from different publishers there, and if you were just to go into any one of them and tap and open up a piece, you would get a piece on the screen, and you can now start to explore the features of SuperScore. And at this point, you would notice in the upper left corner, there is a shopping cart button, and at that point you could go to the store simply by tapping on it. And in a moment, I'll take you there and show you what that experience is all about. So I would like to cover some of the features of SuperScore that make this environment especially unique and helpful to anybody who is playing from a musical score, whether they're a professional performer or a student or somebody who is teaching. And then I'll be turning the session over to my colleagues here who are going to then bring these features to life with real content that has meaning in the piano teaching area. So for starters, if you had opened up this piece for the first time, you might be thinking, well, this is neat. This is this Bergmuller Ballade, but gee, the score is kind of small. Supposing I want to make it bigger. Well, with an iPad, you put down two fingers onto the screen and you spread them and you make things bigger. Now, if you were using a PDF viewer, like a FourScore or a similar program, you would do that and you wouldn't be able to see the entire page anymore because it's bigger than the screen. But with SuperScore, when you let go, you'll notice that the music has changed size and has been reformatted on the fly. We call this our liquid music notation technology. I'm going to take two fingers now and pinch inwards and make the music smaller. So the music is literally being re-engraved on the fly to my viewing specifications. If I take my iPad and rotate it, again, it will be reformatted. I can resize it at will, rotate back to landscape, and so forth. So there are a few apps out there that will resize music, but to the best of my knowledge, SuperScore is the only app with liquid music display technology that does it with publication quality, as though the music engraver had started all over again with a different size piece of paper, different size of notation symbols, and re-rendered the score from scratch. And SuperScore does this instantaneously. And I'd like to point out some of the pedagogical advantages of that. I mean, we're looking at a fairly complex piece right now, the Burgmuller Ballade. But as you no doubt know, when you're working with students, at the very beginning, their issue is discriminating between lines and spaces. What note is that note on that particular line or space? But as you become a more sophisticated reader and your eyes can take in more information vertically and horizontally, you benefit from being able to literally zoom out. You can read the music at a smaller size because you're recognizing patterns, you're understanding the musical words that are being built, known as chords, on the screen, and so forth. So that's our liquid display technology. Now, if you haven't gone to the store yet to acquire anything, you might notice in the lower left corner there is a playback button, and you could tap on that and hear a performance. You're now seeing a page turn. Your eyes can move to the next page whenever you wish. Playback in SuperScore is something that is adjustable. We can change the tempo because the playback is Midi. And right now you are hearing this playback from the iPad going directly into Zoom. We have a virtual piano that's a very high quality virtual piano built into SuperScore, along with 127 other general MIDI voices of very high quality that enable you to hear playback right here in the iPad. But if you were connected to an instrument like a digital piano or to an acoustic piano with MIDI playback, such as a Yamaha disc clavier or a Steinway Spirio, your MIDI instrument could be playing back the performance, and you would be hearing the performance coming from your instrument. Okay, I'm going to tap on the shopping cart and just give you a quick glance at what that experience is acquiring material in SuperScore. There are a lot of publishers, one of the most prominent of which, of course, is Piano Safari. And if you were to tap on one of these pieces here, this is an example of a single piece. You'll see what the music looks like, you get a description, and there's even a video that will play back the piece. And in the case of other kinds of materials like this repertoire book, you'll see a couple of examples. You get an outline of what the content is all about, its scope and sequence. And so you get an opportunity to find out quite a bit before you make a purchase. Because I've purchased all these things, you don't see the price right now, but there would be on the right side a link you could tap on to make a purchase, sign in with your ID, and open the music once you've got it. So let's pretend you've made a purchase and you're going to go and locate it and work with it. In the upper left corner of my iPad, I've got a folder button which takes me to the library. And I'm just going to quickly bring up a couple of things. Normally you'd want to start with your albums and navigate them. Now in my case I have a heck of a lot of albums, so I'm going to do a little search here for something that I want to show you. I've tapped on the search button up here and I'm going to type in Yang Z, or the beginning of Yang Z. This is a piece by Christopher Fisher. I'm fascinated, and my students are fascinated with the fact they can zoom in on this picture and look at it in some detail and get a sense for what this music is all about. But I'm going to do a little bit of playback of this, and I want you to notice what the playback experience is like in terms of the human quality of it. you can hear the phrasing so clearly and the expression. And in the lower right corner, you can even watch the tempo changes that are taking place, because this is a human performance. It breathes. Imagine what our experience as musicians would be like if we could buy an album of Beethoven's 32 sonatas with embedded performances by Beethoven himself. Well, of course, that's never going to happen. But the Beethovens of the 21st century can literally embed their musical selves into a score here in SuperScore. And you've got an opportunity to take that composer home with you. That composer is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In this case, Christopher Fisher is really more available to you in SuperScore than he probably is to his family in the course of a week. But these are the kinds of things that that you can do in SuperScore. Now, I'm going to show you another human performance here. I'm going to quickly go back here, and I'm going to search for the word shadow. Shadows at Dusk by Julie Nur. And I'm going to play just a little bit of the beginning. Again, beautiful phrasing. You can see here the gentle speeding up and slowing down as the music breathes. Now, if you were connected to a Midi keyboard, which is one of the capabilities here, you've got an option. If you look down in the lower left corner where it says that the play mode is normal, I could tap on that and switch to an interactive mode called Learn Mode. And in Learn Mode, when I engage playback, I'm going to be expected to play what I see on the screen, and the cursor is not going to move until I play it. I've got a little keyboard here at my desk. I'm going to play the first note and chord. And notice that the cursor moved. It's waiting for me to play the next note. I'll do it. Oh, it didn't move. What's my problem? Oh, shoot. I didn't notice that this key signature has 3 flats. I've got to flat that note. And so forth. So hopefully you're now getting this sense that, well, with this technology, you can have some interactivity here. And I can tell you that most of my students have a MIDI-capable instrument at home, and they do not come in having learned wrong notes during the week, because there is a SuperScore there to check them during the week. Another very quick example of the kinds of things that you can do. I'm going to search for something called Piney Wood's Boogie. If you wanted to know what a Piney Wood board looks like, well, there it is. Listen just to the beginning of this piece. Oh, I've got to get out of Learn Mode here in the normal playback. So already you can see that there's a challenge here getting the right hand to come in on the offbeats at the beginning, and it's a brisk tempo. Well, imagine that you could go to the parts menu in the upper right corner, and you could turn off the playback, let's say, of the left hand. And let's say you went down here and you decided you're going to slow down the tempo, and you were going to turn a metronome on. And on your acoustic piano, you were just going to try to play along that right hand, counting along the way. And can you play those notes on time? And so forth. So we've got this capability in SuperScore of really dissecting the music in any number of ways and interacting with it. 2 more very quick examples before I turn it over to my colleagues here. I'm going to do a search here for the word extravaganza. Whoops, not that one. Not looking for Robert Vandal. We're looking for 88B. So if you worked your way through this technical book, I was really fascinated by this. This is a recent Piano Safari publication, and when I was helping Piano Safari colleagues here to put this together into SuperScore, I listened to it and I thought, wow, this sort of assembly of all the technique that's been learned in this book is so much fun to play. There's an accompaniment going on. Listen to a little bit of this. Well, I practiced the minor scales to this. And so forth. You got to be on your toes. You got to be able to switch keys. But, you know, it's just a lot of fun. So where is this accompaniment coming from? Well, in the parts menu, you'll find that there is a teacher part. And this is something that you could do at a lesson. The teacher could play along. If student and teacher both have an iPad, you could hide the student part and the teacher could be reading her part on one iPad. The student could be reading the student part on a different iPad. Or you could both be playing from the same part on the same iPad at whatever size of display you can agree on, and work that way. So you have a lot of possibilities here with the showing and hiding of parts. And that comes out in quite a number of different ways in the Piano Safari material. And one more example here. I'm going to search for one of my favorite Christmas tunes, maybe not one of the better known ones. Where are we?
At the top.
Was that the top?
Joy of Christmas, is that what you're looking
Oh,
for?
there it is. I was looking down alphabetically, but it found the best match of those three words and it stuck it at the top and I ignored it. Okay, there we go. You'll have to correct me. I think this is an English carol, is it not?
I think so.
It's a very beautiful one. I've always liked the ones that have a minor quality to them, but I'll bring up the teacher part just to play a little bit here. Here comes the tune. So I said it was in a minor key. I mean, it has a minor quality to it, but it's actually the Dorian mode. And I think it's just exceptionally beautiful. Of course, this is a lovely arrangement. But that's a glimpse of the different levels of interactivity that we have here in SuperScore. And I'll just emphasize the point that exceptional technology is nothing if there's not outstanding content. And in the case of teaching materials for students, if there's not excellent pedagogy that's embedded into that content, again, the technology on the surface that's provided by SuperScore would be meaningless. So I'm very excited to have Julie and Katie here to tell you about their materials and to show you what the experience is as they're used in SuperScore.
Thank you so much, George, for that really clear explanation and for showing all those examples. I agree with the minor Christmas pieces. I just love those. They're some of my favorites. So just wanted to clarify what we do have available on SuperScore now. We've been working steadily on adding things. It is quite a process as we make a score and edit all of the audio for every single piece in Piano Safari. So right now we have level 1, 2, and 3 of the core method completely available. We're working on adding audio tracks for the sight reading cards right now, but you can get the PDF version. And the older student books are what we're working on. We do have older student level 1, and we have the repertoire and technique book for level 2. So we will keep plowing away so the older student is added. And we have so many different supplemental books, 4 of Chiwa Tan's books, and some other pieces that are solo sheets, as George showed you. So for the rest of the webinar, we're just going to show you a few selections from some of these things that we have available, and starting with Repertoire Book 1 from our core series. So let's take a look at Charlie Chipmunk, and if any of you are familiar with Repertoire Book 1, you know this is the earliest rote piece in the book. And again, Julie mentioned this at the beginning, but I just wanted to reiterate that if the piece is taught by rote, students aren't actually reading this notation. They don't understand yet about the key of G flat major. But the nice thing about SuperScore is all of the accompaniments are included. So students can still play along with the SuperScore, even though they're not reading all of this notation yet. So let's talk about some of the different options for Charlie Chipmunk under the parts menu up in the upper right hand corner. So here we have the student and teacher parts displayed, and if you did playback, you would hear right now both parts. So you could use this two ways. For a student who is just learning Charlie Chipmunk, perhaps you want them to practice it with just the student part. So Julie, let's do that. Let's turn off the teacher and hear a little bit of just the student. So since this piece is learned by rote, it needs to be firmly ingrained in the student's ear correctly, and SuperScore has another benefit to that. They can hear their part correctly by listening to it on this app. So after they're able to play along with just their part, then they can play with the teacher part instead. So let's try that. Let's hear just the teacher part. Back to the beginning. So of course you can also set the parts menu so that you're hearing both the student and teacher together, which may be another good practice option for your students. And as George mentioned earlier, you can also set the metronome. This was a performance tempo of the piece. As you can tell, that was fairly fast for a beginning student. So they can slow it down and work it back up to the performance tempo. So let's move on now and talk about a sight reading card from level 1.
So the sight reading cards, as Catherine mentioned, we are still working on getting the audio files, but you can get the PDFs of them if you want to use an iPad to learn the sight reading cards. And once we have the audio in, I believe you'll be able to update your version to include the audio. Correct, George?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. In fact, if I could just amplify on that, the now that publication is taking place in the electronic realm, some publishers are updating their publications as they further develop their materials. And so this is a nice example that you've decided to add playback, and that will be a free update to anybody who has purchased the cards already.
So one of the greatest things about SuperScore for the sight reading cards is that you can mark the score. So if I go up on the right hand corner and tap the little pen, and then I go to the left and tap the little crayon button, I can circle my treble clef right, or red for right hand, which is something we do when we have the paper version as well. And then we can also mark the sames or unisons, which is something we do at this level on the score too. There's some unisons right there. We like to have the students find where the notes go up, down, or stay the same and mark the sames because it's surprising how difficult this can be for 6- and 7-year-olds until they get really used to seeing the intervals on the score. So I can tap to finish the drawing, and I can also change the colors if I want. I can change the transparency so you can still see the notes through the marking, or the line thickness, or the size of the marking. So there's a lot of things you can do with marking on the score. So let's move on to the next piece, which is
Julie.
Oh yes.
Would you mind going back to the piece just before this, because Peggy Otwell asked a question that's specific to this piece, and I think it might be nice to hit it at this moment. She asks, can the tempo be slowed down, and could you ask students to use 2 hands in a black key 3-2, 2-3-4 position?
So yes, you can slow the tempo down. On when I was watching George's part of the presentation, I had a zoom bar at the bottom, so I couldn't quite see all the markings at the bottom of the SuperScore thing. But whether if you can see it or not, I'm not sure. There is a metronome at the very bottom, and then the tempo, so you can set it there. So I could set the tempo to be slower and then play it. Oh my, that's going to take us forever. I'll speed it up. And I'll slow it down. I could speed it up. We have had students want to play it that fast. So it's nice to be able to set the tempo at whatever your student needs.
So the other part of her question, I think, was pedagogical, putting left hand maybe on the 2 black keys and the right hand on 3 black keys.
You could do that. We like to have them start just with finger 2 to get the forearm motion better, but if you have a more advanced student and you'd like them to play it with 2 hands, that's certainly an option also.
Okay, thank you.
So let's move on and talk about City Stroll, and this is a reading piece from Repertoire Book 1 from Unit 3. So at this point, students have just begun to read Seconds on the Staff. So let's just listen to this piece with the accompaniment one time through, Julie.
And also, you'll notice that for each piece, there's a page, a PDF page, so you can see what it looks like in the actual printed book. And then there's also the SuperScore version, so that's why you see both. And I'll play it with both parts, but with the teacher part hidden, because that's what the student will be seeing most of the time.
So many great features in SuperScore for reading pieces. That green bar really keeps students' eyes tracking in the right place in the music, even when they're not in a lesson with you as the teacher and you're helping them track, perhaps by pointing above the note as they play. But the app will help them with that. And of course, that tempo adjustment is a wonderful feature. And let's just take a look again at the parts menu, Julie, so we can display the teacher part. So if you're in a lesson with a student and you're playing from the same iPad, you can display that and play it with them. Or, at home, the teacher part would be hidden, but they could play along with it if they desired.
Could I interject a question that came up in the chat? Deanna Milligan is asking, are the scores exactly as from the book? I noticed that the teacher's part for Charlie Chipmunk shown varies slightly from the one I've played so many times this week. I know that the two of you have been quite scrupulous about making them the same, so
yes. This one is exactly the same, if I'm not mistaken. Just looks a little different because of how the 8 bars are squished together on the, this is a page from the book. And then, of course, in the SuperScore, you can spread it out as much as you want. So, but I think all the notes are the same.
That's certainly been the intention all along.
We can double check that. If there is a difference in the SuperScore versus our book, then that's something that we would want to fix. They're supposed to be matching. Actually, Julie, it looks like the right-hand 8th notes are not quite right. So we will check that one. Great, look at this. See, we had to have lots of eyes on that to catch the difference. In the second measure, it's supposed to be E flat, D flat. Great. Okay, yes.
A typo. Yes, there are typos, so please write us if you see one, and we will fix it.
Because we're going through such a huge quantity of music, but George's eyes and Julie and my eyes are on it all, so hopefully you won't find too many of those problems.
And again, when these things come up, it's a very simple thing that it gets fixed on the production side. And unlike a paper book, which would have to get reprinted, free updates are made available in SuperScore all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so you can always keep the most up-to-date version. So let's just look at one piece from Repertoire Book 2. And this is Dromedary Dance. It's a reading piece from the end of the book. So you can see the reading levels advance substantially when you compare it to City Stroll that we looked at just a moment ago. So in this piece, students are playing hands together, which is a change. In the previous piece, they were only playing with their right hand alone. And here they're playing a fairly intricate right hand melody with the left hand accompanying. So one wonderful feature for practice is that you can actually take out the audio for one hand and have the student practice with it. So for example, let's go up to the parts again, Julie. And let's say that the student wanted to practice their right hand melody, but they didn't want to play their left hand. So Julie can take the playback off of the piano right hand. And then if we hit play, the student will only hear the left hand, and on their piano they can play. So we can stop that there. That's not, super interesting to listen to if the student isn't actually playing along. But just keep that in mind that you can stop the playback for each hand so that the student can play the other hand along with it as a duet. And that's something I like to do in lessons often with students when I'm teaching them, is have them isolate a hand and I accompany them. So that's a built-in option for home practice on this one. Julie, let's just hear a little bit of the beginning, since we didn't do any playback of how the piece actually sounds.
So it's in D harmonic minor, and the students love that sound.
So let's move on to Technique Book 2 and take a look at some of the exercises from this book. So specifically Chameleon, and this is a page from the book, is an exercise that we're asking students to transpose to several different keys. So it's only printed here in C, major and minor, but then on the next page of the PDF, and if you swipe over, Julie, do you have that page the second? Yes, there you go. So this is in the book, and this is an assignment for transposition. So how we handled this in SuperScore was that we actually have continuous playback of all the keys with a 2-bar count off in between each one. So let's take a listen to how that sounds. So we can stop it there, but it actually goes through all of the assigned keys. So the student can practice being able to play it continuously in all the keys, or that week they can just isolate one key and practice with the app that way. So we also have these Etudes in Technique Book 2, and they have accompaniments to them. So Pouncing Tigers is one that students really love to play fast. So I think this is a great one to use as the tool where they learn it at a slow speed, and once they can play it with good technique and good clarity, they can use that metronome tool and speed it up to have fun practicing it. Let's just listen to a bit of this one too. So let's just take a look at a piece from Repertoire Book 3. now, and there's many duets throughout all 3 levels of Piano Safari, both in our core series and the older student series, that are student-student. And Giacoso from Rep 3 is one of those duets. So here we have both the primo and the secondo part displayed by default, since it is not a student-teacher duet, it's actually a student-student. But keep in mind, you can always hide the other part if you wish up there under the parts option.
Could I interject just one thing very quickly? Because one of the attendees has pointed out that suddenly for her, the moving cursor across the score doesn't seem to be in sync with the audio. And that's just a Zoom thing based on one person's connection to the internet or another. Because the connection from the iPad to the computer is going up to the cloud and then out to everybody else. And that's just a limitation of technology today. But if you had the iPad right in front of you, those things are exactly in sync.
Yes, yes. It's kind of like if you're listening to a student play on Zoom and they suddenly sound like they're speeding up and slowing down.
Somebody described that once as internet rubato.
So for a student-student duet, this is great if you have 2 students in your studio that are paired to practice together. You can have them with this app work with their digital partner during the week by playing their part with the accompaniment, and then they'll be prepared when they go into that rehearsal and they play it with their duet partner. Let's just listen to a bit. Right, so moving quickly through here, we want to show you just a few supplemental things at the end too before we finish and take time for questions. Technique Book 3 is our newest edition. I don't even think I've published that this is available. It just became available this week. So Technique 3 has hand and variations where we give them different rhythms or different articulation or both. So this is hand and exercise number 1 with the salty French fries rhythm, and these have accompaniments to them also. So let's hear a bit.
Which are jazzy, which is fun. So the older student books also are becoming on SuperScore. We have the Repertoire and Technique Book 1, and we just wanted to highlight this pre-staff one. There's a short pre-staff section at the bottom to acquaint the older beginners with their finger numbers and how to track as they're reading on the score. And this one, Sapphire Jazz, is fun because it has a really jazzy accompaniment. So this jazzy accompaniment was written by one of my colleagues from school who's an actual jazz pianist in Cleveland. So it's a very sophisticated accompaniment that adults would like playing with. And I made the score bigger because I need to get my glasses checked, and some of your older beginner adult students might really be glad that they can magnify the music so big. And then one from older student book 2 is Waltz in D major, this is the student part on the staff, but it has a really sophisticated accompaniment and allows students to practice at home in 3/4 meter, so they can solidify their playing in 3/4 meter. Because I'm sure all of you have had the experience where you go through and do the rhythm in the lesson and you think they have it, and then they come back the next week and they don't have the rhythm. So they can practice with the accompaniment at home, which is really helpful.
So let's just take a quick look at some of our supplements. We do have 4 Christmas books, the 4 Joy of Christmas books, all available on SuperScore. Jingle Bell Jazz is one of my very favorite pieces from level 1. And this has a very simple student part. It's just the straight Jingle Bells tune, but it has a relatively complicated teacher part. It was written by a jazz pianist that teaches at Ohio University. So it's very helpful for a student to practice with this audio track during the week at home to get accustomed to it before playing it in a recital. And if you're interested in listening to more of these, as George said, we do have sample videos online where you can hear the pieces with their accompaniment parts. So Julie, let's go ahead and skip ahead to A Child's Garden of Verses. So we have 4 of Chihuahua's Tan's books on SuperScore, Through the Window Pane, A Child's Garden of Verses, Circus Sonatinas and Windy Nights and Other Tales. And we'll work on adding a Royal Birthday Suite also. Another book that we have available right now in hard copy on the Piano Safari site. So many of Chihuahua's pieces are on various exam board lists like ABRSM. So let's take a look at one of those pieces. This is the Swing. It's just one of my favorites from her collection. So Chihuahua recorded these, so you can tell your students that they're playing along with and learning from the composer, and that's something that George mentioned earlier with my husband's works also. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, just a brief overview of what Piano Safari materials are available on SuperScore and how they can be used with this really great app. So I think I'll turn it back over to George. George, do you have anything to say before we take any questions?
Yes, and actually, would you mind going back to the piece that you skipped over? Because I think we could take a brief moment on that, the Valse Melancholique, and start with the PDF cover. And
this one's actually on the National Federation of Music Clubs list.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And zoom into that image there. I just think that is such an imaginative thing to be able to do on the iPad when you have artwork like this, and you can see the paint strokes, and you have a sense of the sort of the 3D-ish surface of the canvas there. And then there's the music that goes along with it. Just a little bit, perhaps. Great, thank you. I was actually thinking about this today because a former student of mine is going to Paris. She's in Paris right now for the very first time, and I had just heard that from her mother that she had complained that the weather was going to change and it was going to be rainy in Paris. And I said, that's not something to complain about. Paris is so gorgeous in the rain, and you hear that in the music, and that the picture on the cover, kind of illustrated that. And I had that music going in my head, so I'm glad that you brought it to this session today. Well, I appreciate very much both of you, what you've done in both the creation of these materials and in the bringing of them to SuperScore. They really come to life in a new way. It's not to suggest there wasn't life before, of course there was, but it's such a rich opportunity to experience the music and to get into it, to get acquainted with it by listening to the composer playing it, practice one hand while maybe the composer plays the other hand, things of that nature. Well, we do have quite a number of questions that have come up here. Shall I just feed them to you? Lizbeth is asking, will the diversion books be added to SuperScore in the future?
Yes, we can do that.
We are working toward adding everything, but it's just a process. But yes, that'd be wonderful to have Juan Cabeza's books on SuperScore for sure.
Rachel asks, are the scores in SuperScore the same price as hard copies purchased in a music store?
Yes, they're just slightly different because Apple only sells things at 99 cents. Isn't that true, George? So if a
That's
book's
right.
like $8.95, it's like $18.99.
In the United States. Now, when you see the price in Canadian dollars or Australian, then you get other permutations, but Apple requires us to specify them as starting off and ending in 99 cents US. Tracy asks, upon purchasing one of the books, is there a studio license that goes with it, or would each student need their own purchase in order to use at home?
So yes, a student would download for use on their individual iPad to use it at home.
Right, so they have to make their own purchase. Everybody's purchase is tied by Apple's convention to the Apple ID that they used at the moment of purchase. And so your Apple ID belongs just to you. But I do want to emphasize that if you get a second iPad or a third iPad or have several iPads in your studio, if they're all associated with the same Apple ID, you can go to the store in SuperScore, tap on a link that says update and restore purchases, and the purchases you made on iPad A will then flood into iPad B. And of course, this makes it easy for you in the future when you upgrade to the latest and greatest iPad from Apple and you retired the old one, which is now an old one. Your purchases can go with you electronically. Mary is asking, if I purchase the sight reading cards, but would I have to purchase again through the app to get these in the app for the audio? So I guess the answer would be different if she'd purchased them physically versus virtually to begin with. I'm presuming as you add the scores, we're updating the existing SuperScore version of the cards, correct?
Correct.
So if you've purchased them already in SuperScore, you'll just be getting a bonus that you would not have expected when you first bought them, because Piano Safari is updating them. If you bought them physically, there's no way to migrate that purchase to the virtual world. Oh, what else do we have here? Does the SuperScore price of level 1 include the sight reading like the printed books? That's from Marie.
So the level 1 pack physical books, you pay for the book plus the sight reading cards in a pack, but on SuperScore, everything lives individually. So you would purchase the repertoire book separately from the sight reading cards, but they would add up pretty much to the same price as the physical pack. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I think so. Rachel asked one that I can answer. So the SuperScore app is free and you only pay for scores that you wish to use, correct? And that is correct. Can you explain, this is from Lisa, how to import personal PDF scores? And I'd like to just show that to you very quickly. I'll share my iPad. In SuperScore on the iPad, if you tap the gear button, you'll get to a screen where you can go through and configure the iPad for MIDI communication with your MIDI keyboard if you have one. You've got some general settings for, let's say you want the iPad not to go to sleep during a lesson or during a gig. You've got page turning options. You can work with a Bluetooth foot pedal to change pages if you're just reading scores off of SuperScore. And there is an item that says import PDFs. And mine says I already have that capability. But if you get into this screen for the first time, it'll say that that's $4.99. And you tap on it, you buy that ability, and then you can import your own PDFs. I will tell you that SuperScore's PDF features are not nearly as rich as they are in a program like Fourscore, for example, which has a camera capture and the ability to change the orders of the PDFs and rotate them. And it's like the Swiss Army knife of PDF viewers. We don't do that. but we can view them. You can incorporate them into collections. And in fact, during Julie's presentation at the beginning, where she was effectively showing you slides and then showing you music in SuperScore, those slides were PDFs that she brought into SuperScore, put them as part of a collection interspersed with the music itself. So that's a nice thing you can do. And by the way, we would encourage you to tap on SuperScore newsletter and subscribe to news from SuperScore and TimeWarp if you wish. So back here to questions. I think that answered the... Oh, and Lisa wants to know she's already has the ability but can't figure out how to do it. There is a section on how to do it in the documentation in SuperScore. There's in the upper right corner, a question mark with a circle around it. Tap that, it gets you to the documentation, and it will tell you. It's kind of a standard way that you can share a file from one app to another in on the iPad. And if you have difficulty with it, feel free to contact me directly, and I'll work that out with you. Or else go through the support system on the TimeWarp website, and another colleague of mine will answer you on that. Jane?
I see this question in the chat. It says, can a Zoom student play and perform a duet online with the accompaniment and the teacher hear the performance over Zoom?
So the answer is yes, but you have to do it in the right way. So today, to do things with the greatest clarity for an audience, either I or Julie physically connected our iPad to our Mac and did screen sharing of the iPad through Zoom, which meant that the sound coming out of the iPad was uncorrupted, full strength, going into Zoom, and then Zoom does what Zoom does. If you wanted your student to play along, your student would need to hear the music as it comes out of either the student's Midi keyboard or out of the iPad. That sound would need to go into the air, along with the students playing on their piano going into the air, going through the microphone into Zoom, and yes, you would hear both. Now, the iPad speaker is not a terribly loud speaker, and so if they were playing with the sound coming out of the iPad, it would probably be a good idea if they plugged into a speaker. If they could get the sound coming out of their keyboard speaker, if it's digital, then it'll be just as robust as their own playing, and the quality would be just what it is in terms of the quality of their sound coming off of their piano. So yes, you can in that context. Jane is asking the two of you, when is OB Book 3 going to be available? Will SuperScore be available for Android or Windows in the future? Well, the second part is, hopefully yes, but there's no promise as to when, and that's in the somewhat distant future. But OB3, your response would be?
Older student 3. So yes, we're working on that. We have to finish older student sight reading in theory 2 first, and then we will dive into the older student 3 books. So we will continue to work with that. I don't have an exact date, but hopefully not too long.
Okay. Peggy's asking a technical question about Apple IDs. If we change our Apple ID, are there any steps that we should take to make that happen? And the answer is, try not to do that if you can at all avoid it. Now, I know some people, particularly married couples, sometimes start off their digital life sharing the same Apple ID. My advice is that's usually a bad idea. But Apple ties purchases to an ID. And so if you change your ID and you need to restore your old purchases from the previous ID, you can't do it when you're signed in with a new ID. Now, in a cumbersome way, you can sign out of your new ID, sign into your old ID, go and recover your purchases, and then sign back into your new ID and get new ones. But it just makes getting updates a little bit awkward if you do that. So I would avoid switching IDs if you can. Sharon asked me if, since I referred to Bluetooth foot pedal for iPad, can I recommend one? I've had both one from AirTurn and from Page Flip. They're both quality companies. My pedals are not the latest ones anymore because I've had them for so long. So I'd hesitate to rate one better than the other because times change and products change, but I would say investigate error turn and page flip. One feature I enjoy on my page flip, I paid for the more expensive one, and it has an optional light that can be turned on. So if you're playing in the dark in a gig and you have the light on, you can look down and see where your pedal is, and I do appreciate that feature. Tracy asks, so then do you ask your students which they would prefer, a hard copy book or SuperScore? Now the three of us might have individual answers to that. If I could interject my answer. All of my students, except for two, have digital pianos, and they really enjoy being able to connect their iPads to the pianos, or they have an acoustic piano with Midi. But 100% of my students have iPads. So I basically have them all buy their music in SuperScore unless they need to learn something that's not yet available in SuperScore. So that is my answer.
Mm-hmm. I tend to use all hard copy material and just enhance lessons with SuperScore, and then if the parent's so inclined, they can purchase it for the accompaniments. We do sell accompaniments just as an audio download, but I think that SuperScore has more options, which is so easy to speed up and slow down with the metronome right there, for example. So yes, I add SuperScore into my teaching with hard copy materials typically.
I do the same.
It's really a matter of preference, since there's definitely benefits to both approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Well, different people live in different places where families have different levels of means, but certainly if they do have the means to have an iPad, the student has pretty amazing resources with the SuperScore version at home during the week. I did write an article for American Music Teacher, the publication of MTNA, a few years ago, and I titled it, "Give me 0.023% of your time and I'll teach you how to play the piano." And I came up with that figure based on teaching 30-minute lessons 40 weeks of the year to a student, like the minimum possible amount. And the amount of time I had the student under my control, so to speak, was just microscopic. So in the end of the day, students need to take ownership of the learning process, be their own teacher. And I do think the SuperScore provides them with materials that help them to achieve that when they have it at home between lessons.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Any other questions?
Well, did we exhaust our questions? Deborah had one here about Zooming, but Mario kindly had answered that, so I think that one got answered. Well, this has been wonderful. We will post the video replay of this webinar in a number of different places. Those of you who signed up for it will get an email from TimeWarp Technologies telling you about that. And if you visit Piano Safari on the Facebook page, I'm sure you'll see notification of where to get to it there. If you visit the SuperScore Facebook page, you'll see notification there. I will, to send you this email, have to temporarily put you on a SuperScore/TimeWarp email list from which you may unsubscribe if you wish. I don't want to spam you into the future, but if you'd like to stay with us, we'll have a lot of exciting things to share with you going forward.
Yeah, thank you everybody for the kind comments over in the chat and just your attention and your great questions throughout the presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. So I guess at this point we should sign off. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Katie. It's such a pleasure to have had you here today, and I so much appreciate my ongoing work with you as you put more materials into SuperScore. So look forward to our future interactions here. And to everybody else, I hope to see you again in cyberspace.
Thank you,
Bye,
George.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.